visuals of stranded passengers at the airport there. But after many hours of behind closed doors, Organized Labour says it is going ahead with a planned nationwide strike over a new minimum wage. President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, and the Speaker, House of Representatives, Abbas Tajudeen, agreed that the meeting was fruitful and called on Organized Labour to resume negotiations with the government. While responding on behalf of Labour, the president of the Trade Union Congress, Festus Osifo, said the strike holds since they lack the power to decide on behalf of the resolution of the entire workforce.
The 10th National Assembly believes strongly that anything that will bring more yoke, more suffering to the people of Nigeria must be avoided. We also know that it's not just a question of strike in wards. Where the hospitals are closed, most poor people will die. Those who are even on oxygen will die. Those needing medical services will die. Goods and services will not move freely. Productivity will reduce drastically. The living standard of Nigerians will also be impaired. Hence, in the last 4 hours, we have been making appeals, and we are still appealing. Leadership of the NLC and the TUC to quickly return to the negotiating table with government with a view to finding a lasting solution on this minimum wage issue.
Meanwhile, before the Organized Labour entered into a closed-door session with the National Assembly delegation and the Tripartite Committee on the Minimum Wage, both parties discussed the issues and possible resolutions. National Assembly correspondent Joke Adisa has details.
48 hours after Organized Labour announced its resolve to commence an indefinite nationwide strike following the stalemate on new minimum wage, the leadership of the National Assembly intervenes. The meeting, which started at about 5:25 p.m., is to stop the planned industrial action. In the brief opening remarks, the President of the Senate and Speaker, House of Representatives, called on all parties to be open-minded towards reaching an amicable resolution. Both leaders, however, warned Organized Labour not to insist on a wage that will lead to job loss, particularly in the private sector.
Whatever agreement we come to will be mutually beneficial to all, the government and the workers. So we are all concerned. But we must also be mindful of collateral damage. I don't want us to, in the course of trying to arrive at a minimum wage, we end up with a lot of serious issues of unemployment.
There is no two ways about it. But we should also be mindful that the mistakes of several decades cannot be repaired within one day. It is going to be a gradual process. We have to start somewhere and then agree to a plan of what we can do to reach that level where every Nigerian worker can beat his chest and say, I am earning.
Also speaking at the meeting before it entered into a closed-door session, the two Labour leaders say they are committed to reaching a truce, but they insist that a living wage and not a salvation wage is their demand, particularly in view of the high cost of goods and services, including the recent hike in electricity tariff.
We are quite committed to finding a way forward, finding a living wage, finding a survival wage, and not starvation wage for Nigerians.
For us, it's been the last 3-4 months has been tough, and Nigerians are waiting for us to give them a wage that at least could assist them in paying transportation to work, could feed them, could house them.
The President of the Senate announced that the meeting will be held for 2 days after which the parliament expects there will be a truce such that the nation's fragile economy is not weakened any further. Present at the meeting are other principal officers of the two chambers of the National Assembly and the chairman of the Senate and House Committees on Labour and Employment. Jokeyatsa, TVC News, Abuja.
Well, joining us for this conversation is the MD CEO, Exiton Consulting Limited, HR expert, Labour Advisor Adeyemi Ajayi. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning.
Now, if you look at the papers this morning, it's a wash with this strike that Organised Labour has called for, and statements coming from the government as well as the Attorney General of the Federation, who is saying that the strike is illegal, and the federal government is saying that Labour should be considerate as it is with its demand, because what Labour is demanding could cripple the economy. But from your perspective, let's look at first how Labour is pushing forward its demands for workers.
Yeah, I thank you very much for having me. You see, this issue, I do not expect Labour to call for strike now. You know, yeah. Why? Because there are processes in place. If you look at the Trade Dispute Act, Section 31, I mean, allows Labour to give notice of 15 days. You know, at least we're going to strike on this day. But that was not done. And that is why the federal government is saying this is illegal. And again, I strongly believe that when you use your worst weapon, you know, at the beginning of the war, what else do you have to, you know, go ahead? So I think Labour should, you know, gradually take some steps before we get to this point.
It has been engaging government for some time now. Recall that the 2019, talking about the law pushed by former President Buhari with regards to minimum wage expired April the 18th of this year. And so Labour had been speaking with regards to that. That in itself was not enough information or bringing this forward before the government to say that we are going to head for a strike as it is, because it says they have been engaging the tripartite committee with regards to this matter. Okay,
you see, in bargaining, there's a point of taking action, but you must follow the right process. Okay? Labour calling for negotiation is not a bad, in fact, it's expected.
Right.
But they are still at the talking table. I would tell you, asking for 615,000 that the government is really pushing back hardly on. It's, for me, I mean, my personal opinion, I don't see that working.
But they actually beat it down to
494,000, you know, from 497 to 494, because, you know, government also increased from 57,000 to 60,000. So if you look at the calculation, they're doing trade-off of 3,000 naira, you know. But again, come to think about it, Labour is asking for the right thing at this point in time. Yeah, they're asking for the right thing, but they should be methodical about it. Methodical in the sense that, first, what we're asking for is really reasonable. You know, you look at 494,000, who can even afford that? Let's start from that. And, you know, there are things that they need to consider, but government needs to also come out with data to support their own decision. That's one of the beginning of this tough with Labour. Labour say, okay, if you're saying 60,000, what are your bases? We have bases. These are our bases. You know, see inflation, see the, purchasing power, see, you know, several economic factors affecting us. So you come up with your data. Let us meet at the point of conversation. But I think, again, why Labour went to that extreme is because they are seeing that government is not ready to move. And
is that what you also think?
Yeah, that's what I think. I think that government is not ready to move. Reasonably, 60,000 naira.
But government came out to give reasons for the 60,000 naira, about 14 of them, if I could just quickly touch on some of it.
Okay.
The first one, 35,000 naira wage award for all Treasury paid federal workers, 100 billion naira for the procurement of CNG fueled buses and CNG conversion kits, 125 billion naira conditional grants and financial inclusion to MSMEs, 25,000 naira each to be shared to 15 million households for 3 months, 185 billion naira palliative loans to states to cushion the effect of fuel subsidy removal, and 200 billion naira to support the cultivation of hectares of land to boost food production, 75 billion naira to strengthen the manufacturing sector. And he talked about the release of 42,000 metric tons of grains from strategic reserves, purchase and onward distribution of 60,000 metric tons of rice from the Rice Millers Association, talking about the light rail that was commissioned in Abuja, in addition to the freedom of civil servants to engage in agriculture. Federal government has approved the inclusion of ICT services for other alternative sources of income. Those are the reasons.
Okay, but between you and I and everyone listening to us, the question is, are these things realistically going to be implemented? We've seen things like this in the past, where government will say, okay, we're going to do X, Y, Z, during the last negotiation in 2018, that's how they promised, we'll give you buses, we give you, but nothing happened at the end of the day. You're going to give 25,000.
Well, we've seen government's efforts with the CNGs in recent times, talking about the plants that were also put in place in one of the states in the southeast as it is, and across the country. We've seen what the government is pushing forward for. And then we also see the domestication of even the production of the CNGs, and then we have conversion stations with regards to the CNGs. Absolutely. That is on the one hand. We've also seen this matter of the 25,000 naira to be shared to 15 million households. There are those.
How many people have received that 25,000?
I do not have the data, but the government says they have pushed that.
Let government show us the data of those they are giving their money to. And let me tell you, you see, giving 25,000 naira to families, to me personally, I don't think that's what government should be doing. They should rather set up structures for people to generate that money for themselves. How long would you continue to give? For 6 months. After 6 months, what happens? What happens after 6 months? Right. And you just say, okay, you give 25,000 naira. What would 25,000 naira do for people now? I mean, we want long-term things, something that will last for the long term. You want to give 75 billion naira to manufacturing. One person in manufacturing sector can swallow that 75 billion for all you care.
That's right.
So we need a lot more than that.
Absolutely. So if you look at the government, the federal government, they have about 1.5 million workers. And an analysis of the 2024 to 2026 fiscal framework shows that the federal government intends to spend 29.18%, that is 24.6 trillion naira of the 84.50 trillion naira budgeted for the 3 years on salaries, overheads, and pensions. So if you look at all of this, do you feel that there is need to check the overbloated workforce? Because, of course, the government is the largest employer of labor. So, and then maybe the ICPC should now even invited the heads, commissioners of the MDAs in order to ask how they've been expending, all of the monies that are accrued to them. So first, do you think there is need to reduce the overbloated workforce? You
were speaking about the overbloated workforce of the federal government and how realistic it is for government to meet up with the demands. I believe so.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you see, what the Minister of Finance made us to realize that if they go the way of labor, they're going to be spending so much, additional about 9.5 trillion naira. Now, come to think of it, I, to an extent, agree with you. This is just without data, saying that, the amount government will spend on about 1.5 million people, workers, is not going to be easy. When making demand, also think about affordability. But again, asking that government should reduce the number of workforce, it will throw up some other things. Some people rely on these jobs to keep their lives together. But then there is need for people audit. The truth is, you may likely not ask everybody to go, but you may just have to move people around. What I know, based on my own, relationship with government, a lot of people are going into retirement, and government is not even recruiting at the rate that people are going into retirement. So they are balancing this out gradually, But again, come to think of it, if at the federal level, government is able to afford this, what happens at the state level?
That's where my next question is, because recall that the 30,000 naira minimum wage, some states are still owing their workers as it is. They are unable to pay these monies. So if you're now pushing for 494,000, how many states can afford it? And even at the federal level, wouldn't we be losing a number of workers as it is? Are we now going to say that, okay, perhaps states should adopt what they can afford? Because at some point, Labour engaged state governments, and they all came out with what they could pay at some point. Here we are hearing that Edo State is saying they will be paying 70,000, for instance. Lagos State is paying 70,000 naira, for instance. How many states are that viable to pay whatever it is we're pushing for right now?
Yeah, what we have is minimum.
Yeah.
You can add, states can add on to that. But let's do simple calculation for the poorest states in Nigeria, for example. Right. Let's say the state is state X. I don't want to mention any name. Now, let's look at a typical family, a wife, husband, and say 4 children. Let's look at how much it costs to, sustain a family at the minimum, in this poorest location. If you do the calculation, I'm telling you, you won't get anything less than 200 to 210,000. However, there are economics of scales that also happen in family, where something around, you see families surviving around 100,000, but you asked a very pertinent question. How many states can afford this? Many states in Nigeria probably wouldn't be able to afford this. And what that will lead to is further, burden on the government of those states to be able to meet those demands. They have pensions to take care of, healthcare to take care of, and so many other projects coming up. So it's complex, for governments at various states to handle. So that's why I said Labour should look at so many factors, at this point of negotiation. Because if they push for a certain amount and government is not able to pay, government is going to owe people, and they will keep owing and owing and owing, and it will be a debt infinitum. So we have to be very careful.
So speaking of Labour and their recent action, shutting down the national grid, we know that a lot of businesses depend on this. Not only businesses, even people's health is on the line. Hospitals will be shut down, and some of those hospitals have not even adopted solar energy, alternative energy. Do you not feel that Labour is biting off more than it can chew?
Yeah, that goes back to what I said earlier. That I think they're using the extreme measures, at the point of conversation. I don't think at this point they should go to that extent of shutting down the national grid, shutting down the airspace. They should look at essentials, to allow them operate at this point. Maybe the non-essentials can come up. There are stages in strike actions. Focus on the non-essentials first, then you get to the essentials.
Non-essentials in this regard could be?
Yeah, non-essentials, transport, for example. But not aerospace. You can just skeletally say that for 1 day or 2 days, the road union should just shut down. Maybe for a day, not an extended one, just like a pause strike. From there, they can go to extent of now saying, but things that are essential like healthcare we should be very careful. These are people's lives. Why fighting for something at the expense of people's lives? We should be very careful there. Some of the non-essentials, if you ask me, people, all these, courts, they can say, oh, let's join them and let's mount pressure a little bit. I'm not saying they are not important. Very important. Everything is important. But they just they don't affect human life directly, So let's start from there. By the time we move further, we get to the point where we now say, okay, the pressure is increasing, then government will find a way. But if you go to the extreme pressure and now start thinking you can use that to negotiate, it's now making the other party to feel like you are putting them under pressure. You shouldn't put the other party under pressure at the table of negotiation. You should be reasonable, but have a gradual step, to mounting pressure so that you can get what you want at the end of the day.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, how far have strikes really been effective at delivering on whatever it is Labour is pushing for over the years? It would be another question that some would ask. This is not the first time we've seen Labour push it in this manner, and here we are again. On both sides, are we really learning lessons and being sincere with our approach at demands and perhaps meeting up demands? There are those who will say that government had between April the 19th up until May the 31st to have addressed these issues. That's over a month. And then on the path of Labour, the sincerity, or there are those who are saying that why is it always wage increment that they are pushing for? How about the cost of living, pushing for from that angle, for instance?
You know, the last statement you made about cost of living should be what we should even focus on. I mean, part of what Labour should demand from the government is to bring down cost of living. If you give Labour 1 million naira today, the cost of living will swallow it. We'll come back. It's a cycle. It keeps moving and moving and moving. So one of the things Labour should ask is, okay, can we reduce cost of living? Now they ask something about tariff. I mean, electricity tariff moving from 66 naira to 225 naira per kilowatt. For me, demanding for that, it's right. You know, it's something that affects almost everything we do. But again, you ask, has this Labour strike been impactful? After some days, some people get tired and say, you see, come on, I have to go out and find something to eat. And they go out. You know, people who make regular money on a daily basis, they will not want to continue this after some time. And government is aware of this. So that's why I said there should be a gradual, push before we get to that extreme. So,
well, perhaps in your opinion, quickly, because we need to wrap up this conversation now, what should be the ideal that Labour should push for?
Okay, permit me to make a calculation for you.
Quickly.
Yeah. Now, if you have a family of 4 people in a month, the father, let's say he eats food 1,000 naira per day, the mother 1,000 naira per day. That's 30,000 naira averagely in a month. The 4 children, same thing, per day, 500 naira. That's 2,000 naira, multiplied by 30 days. That's 60,000 plus the feeding of the 2 parents. That's 120,000. Consider the cost of housing, healthcare, education, transport. If you put all this together, you discover that what should be ideal should be within the range of 150 to about 210, across.
We'll have to leave this conversation here now. We must thank you, MDCU, Exitum Consulting Limited, HR expert, Labour advisor, Adeyemi Ajayi, for your time on the program.
Thank you.